If I had to choose just one lens for the rest of my life, it would be an easy choice. It would be the 50mm lens, and that's because that's a universal lens. It works for everything. Welcome to this episode on YouTube or as a podcast, depending on what you prefer. If you watch the YouTube video, you will of course get the pictures up as well. If you listen to it as a podcast, I would describe everything in detail as well, so we can do both. My name is Albek, and I am an international photographer. I teach photography, and I'm a photojournalist, and I'm awarded from the Danish Press Association as well. When I teach photography, I dive into topics that I'm interested in. I try to encourage other photographers, newbies as well as more experienced, with my approach to photography, and the 50mm lens is the one I will go to anytime. And it sits on my camera, in this case the Leica M here, for 99% of the time. Rarely I change into a wide-angle lens like 35mm, because the intimacy and the quality the 50mm lens gives me is what I need. That's everything I need to do. I can step closer to my objects, I can step away from them to change my framing, and that's all I need. I don't need zoom lenses, I don't need really wide-angle lenses, because what I shoot is in the history of street photography, like Henri Cartier-Bresson, who also used the 50mm lens for most of his work. This is the type of photography that appeals to me, and I know it doesn't necessarily appeal to everybody, and I know it's not for sports, with some exceptions. I know it's not for landscape, with some exceptions. You can watch some of my YouTube videos and talks about that too. But the 50mm lens is kind of that universal tool that almost looks like when you are watching the world around you, it will be almost the same view as you have with your eyes when you look at subjects. And this appeals to me. At the same time, the lens, the 50mm lens, the focal length here is a cheaper lens. In most cases, of course, you can buy expensive lenses in great quality, and that you can do with everything. But the 50mm lens is kind of a lens that you can get in all price ranges. I have a Sony camera here. The lens is quite big when you compare it to a Leica M system, but the quality is also great. The Sony lens, also a 50mm GM FE lens, 1.4, and when we are talking 1.4, we are also talking speed, the speed of the lens. But before we go deeper into this, be sure to sign up to this by signing up for following this channel. Please also visit my website, where you find articles both about cameras, but also the approach to photography. And you can sign up for that newsletter. Just follow the link below, and there will follow some free presets for Lightroom and Capture One, depending on what you're using for your photo editing. The legacy of the 50mm lens is simply born out from the earlier stages of photography, like Henri Cartier-Bresson, who wandered both the streets but also was a photojournalist and used the 50mm lens for most of his impressive work. And it's not just because Henri Cartier-Bresson and others used that lens, it's simply just to mention they use that lens for a reason, because it is a universal lens. It fits so many occasions. It kind of make you being able to be far enough away from people, if you are shooting people like I do, to not being too intimate with them. Getting too close, like with a 28 or 35mm, demands you're getting really up close and have contact with them. With a 50mm lens, you can draw just a little back and still have the right framing and be close enough so you feel present, because feeling present is also part of the 50mm lens. When you look at a photo, you can sense if it was taken with a telephoto lens from a long distance, because it compresses the image. It will squeeze things together, so background and foreground and middle ground will kind of be squeezed closer together, and that will give a little bit of an artificial view on things. I know in sports and stuff like that, that's adds some drama, but now we are talking street photography here and even portraits. The 50mm lens gives the natural view. When you then shift to 35mm or even 28 or 16mm lenses, then you widen up the area and you have to get in closer to capture things. Or you can also put it the other way around. You get much more into your frame at a closer distance. So if that is what you're going for, that's the lens you should use. But for street photography, I find personally that the 50mm lens covers all my needs. I don't need a 35mm lens. I don't need a 90mm lens. I need the 50mm lens, and I never change it, or rarely. Only if I have special assignments where I really need that wide angle. But to be honest, I don't feel that comfortable with it. It doesn't feel right for my way of shooting. And this is what it is about. It is about your way or my way of shooting. And if the 50mm lens is not for you, then you have to swap to do something else. But be kind to yourself, try the 50mm lens out and see how well it works. And if you have a fast speed lens like the Summilux 50mm with an opening down to up to 1.4, which is wide open, then you have a very narrow depth of field, but you can also shoot in very low light, even with an older camera like the M9 here, which isn't the best performer when it comes to ISO, because it easily gets noisy. As soon as you get above 800 ISO, then it begins to make some noise, and at 1600 you also get some color things going on in the details, which doesn't look good anymore. But the 1.4 here makes me able to shoot at low light without going higher up than 4 or 800 ISO, even in really dark areas. The 50mm lens closely mimics the natural field of view, and it kind of makes the compositions feel intuitive and immersive. It isn't like you have to make something strange with a wide-angle lens, which makes this focal length ideal for much photography. And whatever kind of 50mm lens you stumble upon, they will have different characters. They will have different ways of looking. I have some Nikon lenses up here on my shelf behind me, also 50mm lenses, and they look quite different when they are shot on the same camera. When I switch that to a Leica M, or I put my Summilux here over to my Sony camera, or the Canon lenses on my Sony camera, although it is the same sensor, the lenses, the coating and the glass and the quality is quite different. Everything from soft bokeh, the out of focus area, to very busy, and even impact on the colors. So the glass of the lenses are very important, and the quality of that is very important. The Summilux lens here is excellent quality, and I have had this for some years now, and I enjoy shooting with that on daily basis. Sometimes I put on the old Canon 55mm lens, close to 50mm, also a fast 1.4 lens, and that also gives me some really dreamy and interesting characters in the pictures, whereas the Sony 50mm lens is kind of more, it is nice and it looks good, but the glass is simply too big and too heavy to walk around on the street. So for some photojournalism, I might use that on the camera simply because I can shoot with very high ISO on that. But in daily use for street photography, a small camera with a good quality lens is the to-go-to. When shooting wide open, of course, there's a very narrow depth of field, with a 1.4 opening on the aperture. That makes a very narrow depth of field, and you have to hit focus there to get it and to nail it, and that can be difficult. So sometimes in this Oslo series, where I've just went to Oslo for a few days for street photography, I shot at f8, which means I get a lot more depth of field, but I also have to arrange things in that framing, because all elements are suddenly sharp and have to be arranged accordingly. But it also adds the possibility of storytelling by repeating colors, by having objects interacting with each other. Where when you shoot wide open, it's more like that dreamy, soft experience where you only have focus on the essential you want to show, and everything else is blurred out. So you have to choose between one or the other, depending on what kind of photography, what kind of expression you want. If you shoot at f.8, you can be more or less sure that you hit focus with a rangefinder camera like the M here, where you have to nail it. With autofocus, there will be a bigger chance, but autofocus also just find what it's find must be the thing that should be sharp, and that can be odd things. It doesn't have to be what you thought about. So autofocus or manual focus depends on your temper, what you like to work with. I use manual focus all the time because that gives me full control. But the depth of field at an aperture at f.8 gives me a good depth of field where when I narrow it down, I often miss focus because it simply can be very difficult to hit people with the focus area when they are passing by. In that case, I use zone focus, waiting for people to pass a specific point where I have set my focus, and then hope for their expression and movement and everything be all right when they pass that point. So it's a matter of style and what you like to do if you want to shoot with that very narrow depth of field or larger depth of field. But in both cases, the 50mm lens gives me the perspective and the distance and the view of the field that I find pleasing and natural in street photography. As soon as you change to other lenses, you change it from a natural view to something that is more artificial, but can use in an artistic way depending on the goal of the photography. But for normal street photography, where you have that feeling of being present, the 50mm lens gives you exactly that. And that's why I hope to make the 50mm lens great again. Not that it isn't, but sometimes it's a little bit forgotten, like that standard lens that everybody had on their first camera with exchangeable lenses, and then they began to experiment with 35 or Taylor lenses or zoom lenses and forgot about that quality that the standard 50mm lens actually has. And the reason it have this standard label on it is simply because it was that good go-to lens that fits everything. And that's why it ended up being a standard lens and not a special lens. And not being a special lens doesn't mean it is not special, because it is specially good. It has that special view, the natural view, which I appreciate. But sometimes that standard label makes things disappear because it isn't special enough. But it all depends on what kind of style you are shooting. But for 50mm lens lovers, they will often just stick to that and not change it. When I shoot portraits, I shoot it wide open mostly. And I have to nail the eye, of course, so it's sharp and in focus, but it gives that separation from the background and pleasing soft character of the picture, which is really good if it is a good lens for portraits. And when I say if it is a good lens, that's because different lenses have different characters and they can be overly sharp, they can be too detailed. And for portraits, that can be a problem. Less a problem if you shoot landscape where you maybe need that detail. So also consider what type of lens character it has when you buy one, if it fits the way you want your images to look, because it's not only about how you shoot it, it's also about the glass and how it renders both details and colors. The trade-off of having a fixed lens is that you are forced to use your imagination, your creativity to produce good photos. If you have a zoom lens, you easily get lazy, just zoom in, zoom out, and forget about composition and moving around. With a fixed lens, you have to control what you're doing by moving around, thinking about background and foreground, and what happens if you just take 2 steps forwards or 2 steps backwards, or you change the angle and even level the position. So often when I shoot street photography, I don't just shoot straight ahead, standing straight up. I sit on my knees, or I sit on a bench, or I kneel down to change the perspective, to make it more dramatic, to include things in the background that I like to see, and exclude things by lowering the level and shooting higher up. or the opposite, walk up a staircase and shoot down. You can do everything with that. But the fixed lens make you think about what you're doing. But just changing lenses all the time takes your attention away from what you are doing. Having the same camera with the same lens, shooting with that all day long, then you get adapted to what you see with that lens without needing to think about the camera or the settings, because it feels natural when you get the habit with the same tool all the time. It's simply a matter of training. And as soon as I switch lenses or switch cameras, my attentions are put more on the tool than on what I'm actually doing, which can be a disadvantage when you're trying to achieve something with quality. So on my walk in Oslo, I deliberately shot at f.8 in many situations because I wanted to train my eye for that with my 50mm lens on my Leica M9. So I looked for colors, I looked for specific framings, I looked for objects in the distance and close up, and tried to make them interact in a pleasing way so it worked as a good street composition. As soon as I changed to wide open, I defocus everything that is further away or closer to the focal point, and that gives a quite different feeling, which can be as pleasing. We just have to know what it does when we change the settings. The 50mm lens also have a history in the cinematic world. It was the standard lens for a long time. It has been used for that standard lens to put on film cameras for a long time. Henri Cartier-Bresson used it for street photography, for still photos. Stanley Kubrick used it for his film production as a standard lens. In film production, of course, you change lenses more often because you need wide shots, close-ups, and stuff like that. But with the 50mm lens as a standard, you can also just move the camera closer or further away from the scene, and this way change the scene and still have that natural view of what is happening, because the distortion and the angles change dramatically when you change to a wide angle lens. It gives a completely different perspective. You just have to be aware of that. It is not that there's anything wrong with that, but it changes from being a natural view to something that is more artificial. When I walk around looking for subjects, I'm looking for people mainly. I'm looking for interactions. I'm looking for bigger pictures where people are included. It can be with light and shadow. It can be the color play between elements, or it can simply be the expression of human beings and how they are looking at each other or absolutely not looking at each other. And all of that, what is happening inside that frame, I feel is much more comfortable to present when I use a 50mm lens, because that gives that sense of being present in the scene for the people who watch my work. So with that lens, nothing ever feels like a compromise, like when a telephoto lens narrows in everything, or a wide angle lens takes in too much and make the picture with more distortion and falling angles and all of that distortion that comes with that. With a 50mm lens, it feels quite natural and just in front of you. If I should just pick one lens for the rest of my life, and we're just still talking 50mm lenses, of course, then it would be the Summilux spherical lens here, going down to 1.4 in aperture, because it is a great quality lens. It renders the colors, it renders the out of focus area soft and nice. So I can use it for both portraits and street photography with pleasing skin tones, with an intimate but also very clean, sharp image from edge to edge. And some lenses that are not really good quality, you will see at the edges of your frame, there will be a focus fall off where things are not as sharp as they are at the center of the picture. But with the Summilux lens here, it is actually sharp from center to edge, which is a great quality. It is quite well built and not very light, because you should think with a small camera like this that the lens itself should be light, but you can feel the quality just by holding it. And it is built with 8 elements in 5 groups, including 1 spherical element and 1 floating element. I shoot everything with this lens. I shoot weddings, I shoot portraits, I shoot street photography, I shoot photojournalism. The only thing besides my cat being wanting to be here as well is that the maximum focal length here is 0.7 meters, which just gives you about this focal length as the closest to your subject, which is okay, but not close if you want to go in really close to like photographing flowers or something. But that is far enough to do portraits, it is far enough to do street photography and anything else I do. It is a 9-blade aperture, which means it have 9 blades surrounding, closing down when you are closing up or down on the aperture here. There are 9 blades that are shifting in and closing down or up for the light. This gives that really soft and nice bokeh, which means the out of focus area in the background, the closer you go and the more highlight there are in some specific points in the background, the clearer it will be how soft and beautiful they look. Where other lenses, like the 55mm Canon lens, creates a different look. It is a little bit more busy, it is a little bit more sharp, and if you like that, if that's pleasing for your eye, maybe that's a lens you should go for. It is really sought after lens, and also a great quality from Leica here, and it will adapt to the Leica M system here as well, just not the Leica M8 and 9, because there are no electronic viewfinder, and it's not possible to adapt it so that you can use the internal focal mechanism in here. So it has to be with a viewfinder where you can either have live view or you have an electronic viewfinder where you can see what is happening. The thing with both lenses, actually both the Leica here and the Summilux, is that they have exceptional sharpness even at 1.4 opening. And that is a quality mark of a good lens, that when you're shooting wide open, it is still sharp. We're not talking about if you hit focus or the depth of field. When you have a very narrow depth of field and a full opening, it's about exact sharpness where it is sharp, because some lenses, cheaper lenses, will not create the same quality when wide open, and therefore you have to avoid that. So cheaper lenses going down to 2.8, maybe you need to shoot them at f/4 instead, and not also closing them fully down at 16 or 22 if that's the maximum, because there will be a trade-off on quality, which I have seen on many Canon lenses in my time as a photographer, and Fujinon lenses for television cameras, that as soon as you shoot wide open or have narrowed down the aperture completely, then you will have a trade-off in quality and have to avoid that. Also, there is a minimal of vignetting and chromatic aberration with this lens even wide open. So that's why that lens sticks with me forever. So I hope I have convinced you to use the 50mm lens on your camera, because I think it's one of the best lenses ever produced, not when we are talking about specific brands, but the focal length itself. It gives you so much pleasure in your daily life. The 50mm lens simply is the go-to lens for all time for me. So let's make that one great again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.